Right, well, being a mathematician often feels like being a child that just gets to play with increasingly more sophisticated toys throughout life. And sometimes these toys actually get to resemble some of the ones we enjoyed in our childhood. So I want to give you one such example that starts with Lego and goes all the way to my PhD thesis, right? So we all sort of have an idea of what Lego looks like. You start with some basic building blocks and you stack them together to create whatever your imagination comes up with. So here you see a Lego pair of pants and the Lego cap that for no obvious reason I decided to just glue together to get something. And then, as you grow up, you learn about topological spaces, but your inner child cannot help but wonder, is there a way to use Lego-like constructions to create interesting topological spaces? So it turns out that that same pair of pants and the same cap you can use to create pretty much any reasonable two-dimensional space you can come up with. You see what that looks like for the torus over there. And there is more, because mathematicians were so proud of the constructions that we make, right? We don't just want to build a space and throw it away. We want to somehow collect all of these constructions together. And the place where we collect all of these Lego-like constructions together is this mathematical object called the bordism category. But just like children, we are never satisfied with the toys we currently have, right? We always want more toys. And when playing with Lego, one thing that comes up is that usually we use Lego pieces that we can glue together in multiple directions and not just one. So our inner child, again, cannot help but wonder, can we do that in this case? And the answer is yes, of course. Actually, if you use the saddle and the half cylinder and the cap, you can actually create, again, all reasonable two-dimensional spaces you can come up with by gluing them together now in two directions. And the mathematical object where we collect all of these things is the bordism bicategory. Now, this is what leads us to the question in my thesis, which is there a higher dimensional analog to this story? And turns out, yes, there is. It's a little bit difficult, but as they say, double the pain, double the fun. So I've just been basically building these higher dimensional analogs of Legos that you can glue in two directions that can create for you almost reasonable higher dimensional spaces. They look like diagrams as the one shown here, and those diagrams get to encode a mathematical operation called surgery, hence the title of my thesis, which is Surgery Representations of Bordism Bicategories. And it turns out that in dimension 3, you just need finitely many of these guys to describe all reasonable three-dimensional spaces you come up with, which I think is pretty cool. And that's what I had for you today. Thank you.
Physics is doing great. We understand everything. We can use quantum mechanics to describe the atomic world and general relativity for the big objects in our universe, such as stars or even galaxies. But wait, what about black holes? These are big and quantum objects. All right, just use quantum mechanics and general relativity together, you'll tell me. But I can't. These are mathematically incompatible. So I need a new full theory of quantum gravity, and a good candidate for that is string theory. So I want to study black holes using string theory, or more precisely, its limits known as supergravity. That means that I see my black hole as being some configuration of space-time that solves the supergravity equations. Then I can use this solution to obtain some properties of the black hole. So for example, a property of interest is the entropy, which counts the number of quantum states that compose my black hole. And the way to obtain these properties is via some integral over space-time or over the black hole configuration if you want. So far, so good. However, the supergravity equations are dreadfully difficult to solve. So except for a few easy examples, you have very little chance to have an explicit black hole solution you can put back in your integral. So the question we can ask now is there any way to obtain the result of that integral without knowing the explicit black hole solution? So a way to study the black hole properties without knowing the details of the solution. And the answer is yes, and that's what my PhD research is about. So actually, we only need to know about the topology of the solution, so the global shape rather than the local details. Then we have a beautiful math theorem known as localization formula that tells us that the integral only picks up contributions from some specific points of our space, so localizes to these points. So now the work only goes into understanding which points enter and what are the contributions there. But the theorem has some prescription for that. The contributions are some easy expressions to evaluate, and the points are the ones where that are invariant under the symmetry of our space. So for example, if my black hole looks like a sphere, the symmetry is the rotation, I'll only pick up contributions at the two poles rather than integrating over the whole sphere. So in summary, I just need to assume that I have a supergravity solution with a certain shape, and then I can deduce its properties without ever building the solution explicitly or solving any equation. So that's very powerful for a number of reasons. So first of all, we can obtain some new and nice results about various kinds of black hole. And second, this method gives us an avenue into studying some supergravity systems which would otherwise be quite intractable, and therefore a potential way of better understanding quantum gravity. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Sergio. I'm a PhD student in applied mathematics and my project is on colorectal cancer. So the motivation for my project is that the healthy colon has some really neat structure. So as you can see over there, you have all of these tubular indentations on the wall of your colon. If you take a sample of that and you cut transversely, you get all of these tiny, really cute little circles. And the problem is that as cancer develops, cells go crazy, they start doing their own thing, and so you start losing all of this structure. And this is something that doctors look at to decide what type of cancer you may get, what prognosis awaits you, what type of treatment to give you. And so the motivation of my project is to try to quantify these laws of architecture as cancer progresses in a more mathematical way, maybe a bit more reproducible than a pathologist, which knows a lot about biology, just staring down at a microscope. And so instead of working with images, the first thing I do is I turn them into a point cloud where each point is a different cell. And then I use network science and topology or topological data analysis to extract the architectural properties of these tissues. Now, the way I use network science is to represent kind of the local properties, structural properties of this tissue. So if each point is a cell, I use them to represent how different cells that are close to each other are in contact or are kind of biologically communicating with each other. Whereas I use topology for the more global properties of the tissue. So topological data analysis, in particular persistent homology, for example, what it tells you is where your holes in your point cloud are, how big they are, how they are related with each other. And then I use all of that information to try to understand a bit better the architecture of cancer. So as an example of my first project, it's about segmenting big, massive tissue samples. And so the point is that sometimes you need something a bit smaller and more homogeneous and more manageable to run your analysis. Usual practice is you just pick an appropriate size and you cut it up into squares. The project that may have, as you may see here, is that you may get some features that you would like to keep in the same one that you just split into multiple regions. And so by using topology and network science, and if you know anything about those, essentially what I do is I build a network that reflects both the local structure, and then I add some topological weights on top of it so that also plays a part. And then I run community detection of it, and which is essentially a way of splitting your network into smaller pieces. And that gives me some regions of interest that, if you can see in the zoom-in region, kind of work around the big holes that you want to preserve. And so this is a bit of evidence that maths can actually help you understand the architecture of cancer and help you fight it. Thank you very much.
So evolution is the process where a population changes over time and becomes more adapted to survive in its environment. And when talking about evolution, there's this phrase you'll often hear, survival of the fittest, by which people mean that there's some kind of competition in the population, maybe for food or a mate. And in this competition, the individuals which come out alive are those which are fitter. So I, in my research, want to kind of understand this survival of the fittest mechanism in a mathematical framework. So let's think about our population as a bunch of bacteria in a petri dish, which you can see on the top left. And I'm going to say that the petri dish only has enough resources to sustain n individuals. So how does my population behave? Well, at random times, the bacteria are going to divide into two. We can see that the light blue particle there. But since the Petri dish only has enough resources for n individuals, there's now not enough resources to sustain the whole population. So when this happens, the weakest particle, the weakest bacteria, the red one, is going to die. And the other thing that I need to introduce in order to see some kind of meaningful evolution is some kind of random genetic variation over time. And I'm going to model this by thinking of each individual's fitness as maybe being a random process, like a random walk. So this kind of simple description can give rise to a whole huge family of random models for survival of the fittest in a population. And they've got these three key characteristics. We have genetic randomness over time, we have branching, by which I mean reproduction, and we have selection by this survival of the fittest mechanism. And I've shown up here on the right an example simulation of one of these systems with fitness increasing over time. So where does my research come into this? So we have a population of n individuals, and so I want to take the limit as n goes to infinity and see what happens. And what I see when I do that is that the distribution of fitnesses in my population of bacteria is going to converge to the solution of a PDE, and in particular a free boundary problem, which is essentially a partial differential equation with this time-dependent domain, which I also have to solve for. And so there's this connection between these evolutionary systems, these random systems, and these free boundary problems, and as an aside, also to another family of problems coming from mathematical finance called inverse first passage problems. And in this kind of framework, in this connection, traveling wave solutions of my free boundary problem, of my PDE, become these trends of increasing fitness in an evolving population, and uniqueness or comparison theorems for PDEs then become easy to prove using probabilistic reasoning. So my research is about broadening and elucidating this connection between evolutionary models, mathematical finance, and everything in between. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Zoe, and I'm working on modelling tendinopathy with Sarah Waters and Derek Moulton. So tendons are the soft tissue that connects your muscles to your bone. Here we have a diagram of the Achilles tendon, which is connecting your soleus muscle in the calf to the heel bone, and they play a really important role in withstanding loads. And so a very common and painful condition is tendinopathy, where the tendon is swollen and its composition and its structure is modified. And so we want to build a model to understand how this affects the mechanical function of the tendon. So tendons are about 50 to 70% water, and then this solid matrix primarily formed of collagen, and then some other stuff which we won't worry about. So some existing models are purely elastic, so just ignoring the water component and only modelling the collagen. Viscoelastic, so with an additional viscous component, which essentially means the behaviour depends on the rate of deformation. Poroelastic, so we have this coupling of fluid and solid, and then poroviscoelastic, which is a mix between the two. We've decided to go with the poroelastic approach to capture the water and the collagen components. And so then the question is, how do we incorporate damage into this model? Well, I said that in the diseased tendon, the composition and the structure is modified, so you might expect the bulk material properties to be modified as well. And so we can play around with that. When I say material properties, I mean things like the stiffness of the solid matrix or the permeability. So in a pluralistic material, that would correspond to how easily the fluid permeates the solid. But those are sort of difficult to relate to what that means in the tendon. And so what we'd like to do instead is go into the collagen structure. In particular, it has this hierarchy of lots of collagen subunits, and in particular the collagen fibril, which has this crimped wavy structure that you can see here. And basically that means that when you pull on the tendon, the fibrils first need to uncrimp. They need to be straightened out before they start bearing load. And so that's going to affect the mechanical function of the tendon as a whole. And if we use that geometry and that structure, we can then recover the constitutive relationship between the force and the extension of the whole tendon. So this is what we know it should look like from various experiments on tendons. You have this nonlinear toe region at the start, which basically corresponds to the fibrils uncrimping. And then you have a linear region once all the fibrils are recruited. And the good thing about this method is that now we have access to the material properties of the fibrils, which is actually more physically meaningful than these bulk poroelastic properties. And so now we can damage those properties instead, so the stiffness again, or we can think about modifying the crimp angle. So for example, in a damaged tendon, you might expect some fibrils to be less crimped so that they're recruited faster. And so the tendon is having to bear load more quickly. Thank you.
My research is on continuous optimization, where we study these algorithms that try to minimize a given function f. And the only way we access any information about this algorithm, about the function f, is through what is called an oracle. So the algorithm can request the function value and its derivative at any point that it wants, x, and then the oracle returns that point. And the great thing about such algorithms is that they are very flexible and versatile. So you can use them to optimize anything from the shape of a wind turbine to training a neural network. In the past, mostly people have looked at algorithms that can use first-order oracles or second-order oracles. So ones where you have access to the function value and the first derivative, or the function value and the second derivatives. In my research, I'm looking at these algorithms that can also make use of third-order derivative information. And because third-order derivative information or higher derivatives, these are tensors, these are also called tensor methods. Now, there's two different directions to my research in this. On the one hand, I'm trying to efficiently implement these methods. And on the other hand, I'm looking at it from a theoretical side to understand how much more we get by having access to these additional derivatives. And maybe as an example here to show you what these extra derivatives can get you, I try to I've shown this function in black and the Taylor expansion at the red point, and you can see how a linear approximation is already a bit worse than a quadratic approximation, and then in this specific example, a third-order approximation gives you some extra accuracy on the difference between the model and the true function. And so for one of the projects, we implemented this method and tried to find a good example to showcase the advantage. And so that is the part on the right, where you can see how the first and second order algorithms, so these are marked with AR1 and AR2, kind of follow the slalom path down this road, whereas the third order algorithm is actually able to see that there is a shortcut by going straight down the slope and can achieve the same function value in fewer iterations. Thank you very much.
Today I'm going to talk about a module action we constructed for isogeny-based cryptography. So let's start with a classical setting. So we have a group action, we have a group acting on a set. And so we can, and suppose it's an abelian group, right? So we have a commutative diagram. So we start with an element G, which is on the set. And then we have two group elements, A and B, acting on it. And then we get AG and BG. And then if we swap the action, we apply B and A respectively. We get ABG and BAG. And they will be equal because it's an abelian group. And we want to generalize this. So, so what we do is we categorize this. So let V be a closed symmetric monoidal category. The important part is a closed category, which means that the Hom set between any two elements, V1 and V2, will also be like kind of an element in V, right? So in particular, this internal Hom is called. It will give you a bifunctor between V up cross V to V because it's contravariant in the first parameter. And then we can further generalize this because so let's see be a V enriched category. And you can do the exact same construction, and you might hope for a functor of like V cross C to C that is contravariant in the first. And this might not exist, but in the case that we do it, like we instantiate it, it does. And the key part is because it's like V cross C to C, it will give you a monoidal action where you define the action to just be like applying the functor. And so in the instantiation, so on the top left, in the commutative diagram, we set our initial element G to be an elliptic curve, a nice enough supersingular or whatever. And And then in cryptography, we need to choose these A and B, right? We choose them to be left R modules, where R is the FP endomorphism ring of it. And what it means is it will give you an action, and then and it's computable action, which means as the commutative diagram shows, it will give you, like, the two parties will get a shared isomorphic object. And okay, so there are questions of how to compute it. To compute it because of, like, the action gives the equivalence of categories, and then you can do stuff. And then as it turns out, you only need to compute an isogeny, which is efficient as in it's polynomial time in general, but then as it turns out, we don't know how to compute it efficiently for 4-dimensional isogenies, and they're a work in progress. If you know anything, talk to me. And also, we don't know how to derive a shared key because we only have isomorphism objects, not the equal objects. But yeah, and but that's about it. And this is an ongoing project of my master's thesis as well. Thank you.